Hello, and welcome to the Still to Be Determined podcast, the podcast that follows up on topics from the YouTube channel Undecided with Matt Farrell. I am not Matt Farrell. I'm Sean Farrell. I'm a writer and the older brother of the aforementioned Matt Farrell. Matt, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Today, we're going to be talking about the most recent episode from Matt's channel. It's entitled The Truth About Nuclear Fusion Power, New Breakthroughs. And this episode dropped on April 28th, 2020. So before we get into the heart of the episode, I wanted to follow up on something that is related to both big picture, real world news and the most recent episode of this podcast and the previous episode of your channel, because they revolved around Elon Musk and the coronavirus. And he has been, in the past week, been in the news for making what I will call irresponsible statements around what the social distancing shutdown is for, what the impact of the coronavirus is, and the reality of the situation we're in. And before I pass it over to you, I would just like to say that I have a difficult time with anybody who is not in proximity of the threat themselves making judgments about how truly dangerous or safe something is. It always hits me the wrong way. And right now, the coronavirus, one of the very clear impacts is that it is affecting people largely based on economies. People who are affluent are largely safe. And New York City is a perfect testing ground of that, where they have charted the impact of the virus and the communities that are most impacted and the communities that have experienced not only the most illness, but the most death. And it is absolutely along economic lines. The communities with affluence have far less infection and far less impact from actual demise from the illness than those communities that don't. And Elon Musk is an individual who is not running in those communities that is going to be impacted by the virus in the same way. And for him to be making statements that we are experiencing something fascist because our governments are telling us to stay home, I think is socially irresponsible and morally bankrupt. And it is extremely problematic for me. So I just wanted to, I think it was important to bring that up, considering our previous episode was the 5 things we like about Elon. I think it's important to point out that here is a case of a person who should just keep his mouth shut about something that is not actually impacting him in any way other than in his pocketbook. And he comes across as an ignorant and self-absorbed individual when he does this.
Yeah. To also clarify for listeners, Sean lives in Brooklyn, so he's kind of in the heart of where this is flaring up. So you have a lot more of a firsthand view of what this looks like in a community that's getting ravaged by it. I was saying this to you before we started recording. My view on Elon is very nuanced, and it doesn't come across in my videos most of the time. But I'm a huge, unabashed Tesla fanboy. I love what Tesla's doing, from solar, batteries, electrification of transportation. They're changing the world. And I love what SpaceX is doing. And there's so much stuff that Elon is doing that is doing good things for the world. But as a person, he's a flawed individual, just like the rest of us. And he tends to have a blind spot because he's a very... I've worked in software development for my entire career, and computer programmers and engineers tend to be very, the left brain, right brain thing. and they tend to be very like ones and zeros, black and white on a lot of issues. Like I've worked with people that seem to be on the spectrum and they're very like, I am 100% right because this is a math problem and this is looking at it so black and white. Here's what it is. This is the answer. It's like, no, there's gray area to this. And for me, every time I watch Elon and how he responds to things, whether it's how they approached manufacturing their cars in the Tesla factories, let's put robots on everything and make the factories self-sufficient. And later he turned out, everybody criticized him for that. And later he turned out, he said, you know what, you were right. Going all that with all these robots was a mistake. He learns and he adjusts. But oftentimes at the beginning, when he thinks he's right because he's reading data and he's looking at ones and zeros and he's seeing things in a black or white view, he tends to put his foot in his mouth half the time. And when it comes to what's going on right now in the world, there's only one type of person you should be listening to when it comes to the coronavirus and COVID-19, and that's medical professionals and researchers who know what they're talking about. And anybody else that's saying that they know what's going on here and this is a mistake the way we're handling this, you need to ignore. And that's what drives me nuts about what Elon's doing on Twitter and on the quarterly call that just happened where he called this fascist, the response. He needs to understand the bully pulpit he has and the sway he has. And when he says these things, it carries more weight than the average person. And he needs to understand he does not know everything he's talking about because he's not an expert that's been studying this for their entire career. He's an engineer.
Yeah.
And the medical professionals and the people that are, the Faucis of the world who do know what they're talking about directly contradict what he's saying. And it's one of those, I'm going to trust the experts who know what they're talking about on this.
Yeah.
And I just wish he would stop talking about it. The other side of this is I've noticed over the history of Elon is that on Twitter, he tends to say things that are really irresponsible when he gets stressed.
Yeah.
And there was a period where Tesla was about to go out of business. The ramp up to Model 3 was getting really bad. And he was saying things on Twitter that, he wanted to take the company private. When we reach $420 per share, we're going to go private. That got him into trouble with the SEC. He makes these comments and he starts to kind of go off the rails whenever he gets stressed. And right now, he is clearly highly stressed because Tesla is shut down in the United States. They're not making a single car right now. And so it's scary, got to be really scary for, every business owner. I'm an independent businessman and I'm freaking out a little bit. So it's like, I can imagine that his is like amplified by a million times. So he's very stressed. And so he's kind of in a way lashing out. And over the past couple of days, he's said things on Twitter that are bizarre, just flat wrong, and like questionable. So I just wish he would learn from his mistakes and just pump the brakes and understand maybe this isn't a good time for me to be tweeting right now. Maybe I should just keep this to myself for the moment until a cooler head prevails. But he doesn't seem to have that self-control, which drives me nuts.
Yeah. And there's also the element of the legality of some of the stuff he says. There was an SEC investigation when he said he wanted to take the company private because they went into this whole investigation of could it be stock manipulation? And one of the conditions of not being charged with anything was that he guaranteed that his tweets would be vetted by a Tesla lawyer before he tweeted anything. Mm-hmm. And he has not done that. And he recently admitted that he has not done that. And it was after the most recent Twitter explosions where he talked again about what might happen with the company and the stock being overvalued. There was a article I read where some legal scholars are saying the SEC is probably looking at this again to see if he's actually now gone against the earlier agreement.
Yeah, I saw that too, but I've also seen other articles that are saying his comment about it being valued too high is probably not going to amount to anything because this is not the first. This is not the first time he said this. He has basically said that comment like 5 or 6 other times over the past 8 years. Like in 2017, he said it on Twitter we're overvalued for what we're actually doing. And then a year later, he did it again. A year later, he said it twice more. So it's like, this is not the first time he's said that one, but where he was saying the whole, we're taking a private at 420, that has a dramatic impact on the market. Right. Where this one had an impact on the market, but it's in a very different way. And so the fact that he's already done this multiple times, chances are it won't amount to anything, because it didn't. Yeah. They don't think he actually broke the deal with this comment. But from my point of view, it's like, why as a CEO of a company would you even want to say that? Like, why would you say that? Yeah. That's what I don't get.
And the thing you would say would be, in order to protect your shareholders, and the way you start that conversation is with the shareholders. You don't jump on Twitter. And to go back to something you said about when he's stressed, that is that you can read in the most recent Twitter upheaval. You can hear the stress in those tweets. Mm-hmm. If you look at what was said, it does sound like somebody who's freaking out. But I think that, to go back to your comment about the bully pulpit, people, when they get 1 million people following them, their vision of what their role is becomes twisted, and it becomes that I'm smart enough to interpret data.
That's the thing. But that's the thing about Elon. I don't think that's why he's doing this. I think he's always been like this. I think that's how his brain works. Mm-hmm. He is one of the smartest guys in the room, and he knows he's one of the smartest guys in the room. And he thinks the way he thinks is, obviously, most of us think this way. We got the right opinion.
Right.
So it's like, I don't think this is because he has millions of followers, but I think the problem is he's not recognizing the dramatic influence he has because he has millions of followers, and he needs to learn to moderate his public
I wasn't trying to say that it was that the followers was the cause, but that it exacerbates the underlying problem.
Yes, exactly.
That he's already considers himself to be on the right side of these issues because he's a smart enough guy, and he knows he's the smart guy. And then he gets 1 million followers, and some of them go, yeah, you're right. And he doesn't realize that behind those people are potentially some of the people who are militantly trying to push back on social distancing in what comes across as really strange ways. I don't know how demonstrating a lack of social distance proves a point, but there are people who are effectively endangering themselves and other people. And somebody in his position lends them, not only supports their stance inadvertently, but gives them cover, because they can then point to, well, look at these powerful, smart people.
That's kind of what I was getting at before about only listening to medical professionals.
Yeah.
There's part of the reason I haven't been talking about COVID-19 on videos is I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
Right.
And if I got information wrong with that kind of thing, people could die.
Danger. Yeah, it's dangerous.
If I get something wrong about fusion energy, people are not going to die.
Yeah. Although I will admit, I've been building a fusion reactor based on your video in my backyard, and I'm about to plug it in. So
good luck with the plasma reaction, Sean.
Yeah. I got high hopes. Got a bowl full of salt water.
What could possibly go wrong?
And a power strip in the water. I just have to plug it in.
Okay, good luck.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, what's the worst that could happen? So that's a natural segue from our hopefully clarifying discussion around Elon to the subject of your latest video. You've been doing a lot of these lately where I watch them and I feel informed and ignorant at the same time.
That's my goal.
I'm thinking, wow, look at the big brains on Matt. There's a lot of information to unpack. And I think, and this is a compliment. I think your video would be perfect for a classroom of high school students, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no.
This really was kind of, like trying to distill a lot of information into a what is going on and what is the potential, at a level of education that I was able to digest without, like I was watching the video while I was also trying to make some bagels.
Which
so
is
when
the
you reach
shape
the
of a
point,
fusion reactor.
exactly. So when you reach the point where you're like, and it's shaped kind of like a donut, and I was like, no, it's a bagel. Yeah. And I had a bagel in my hand at that moment. I'm like, I am the smartest person in this room right now. Of course, I was the only person in the room, but
which made that factually true.
It was factually true. So one of the things that occurred to me while I was watching the video and while I was finishing it up was the amount of information packed into it's what, a 10-minute long video.
Mm-hmm.
How much time went into your research?
Oh man, these videos take a lot of time because, as I said at the beginning, it hurt my brain. It really did hurt my brain because this was pushing the boundaries of my understanding. And doing a research like this for this video took me days of work spread over probably a week and a half or to 2 weeks of reading. And then when I got to the stage of writing, it was just an intensive like day and a half of writing and rewriting and going back and double checking everything. This one really kind of kicked my butt on the research side. So I probably won't be doing this style of video very often. And I say that with the plans of doing one in a couple weeks. Yeah.
I'm going to lay off on the intense ones, except for the next week's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Don't worry. I've learned my lesson.
I'm a glutton for punishment, but it's one of those I've always loved this style of learning kind of things like this. Like I grew up watching, what was it? Those Bill Nye the Science Guy, those kind of videos, TV shows. It's like, I've always been fascinated with, it doesn't go so in depth that you end up being like, what is happening? It's just like a surface level kind of giving you some basic understanding of what's happening. And I enjoy those. And so I was enjoying reading about this. And so making a video about it was kind of fun.
Yeah. And when I'm trying to imagine, where do you start with this kind of research? Are you just starting with nuclear fusion, or how are you finding out about the history of the research? How are you getting into that?
I usually, it's going to sound really lame, but I usually start at Wikipedia. Just to kind of give me a oversight as to, like, the Wikipedia page on fusion energy has a really good write-up as to like the basics of what it is, how it works, and then the history. It goes to the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. It goes through each decade as to what's happened. So it gave me a nice high-level snapshot. And then based on what I'm finding there, then I kind of drill in deeper. Like, oh, it was interesting research from the 50s. So I will then start researching the people that the Wikipedia article talked about, and I'll find articles on Scientific American and other places around the internet that go into a lot more detail on those specifics. Mm-hmm. Like in the video, I talked about a company called HB11. This guy Australian doctor that discovered like how lasers could create the reaction. I was absolutely fascinated about that. And then I remembered a viewer had told me about HB11 about 6 months ago. And so it's like, he told me, you should look into this company. And I was like, holy cow, here it is. And here's why he was telling me this. Mm-hmm. And so I just read tons of stuff about the company and that professor and like why he came up with this idea, then why it stopped and didn't go anywhere, and then why it picked up again later. It was like, I kind of just follow the threads where it takes me. And I usually start from that kind of like encyclopedia high level snapshot and just work my way down.
And yeah, so that answered my one of my follow-up questions, which was then, how do you get into the company research? And have you reached a point yet where have you ever been inclined to reach out directly to those companies and talk to the people involved directly in the research?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't want to give away future videos, but I've already reached out to some people about stuff just like that, and I want to do more of that. But the whole coronavirus thing has
shut that down. Yeah,
it kind of stalled it because some of these places are closed and not doing research right now. I had actually worked out plans to actually go to some places to talk to people in person. Those have been shelved. So it's one of those, absolutely. It's like, I would prefer to hear it from the horse's mouth and have them explain it. Like when I did that video for Witricity and wireless charging.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason I reached out to them, because it was like, I could do a video talking about this, but this company's right here in Massachusetts. I might as well to go talk to them and have them explain it firsthand.
Right.
So it's like, I like the idea of talking to the people who, like I said, hurt my brain, but here's somebody whose brain it doesn't hurt because they're actually doing it.
Right.
So yeah.
And you mentioned getting it directly from the horse's mouth. How many horses are involved in nuclear fusion research?
A lot of horses, Sean.
That's great.
Yes.
I mean, we do measure things in horsepower.
Yes.
So that does explain that.
Imagine how many horses would it, what's the horse equivalent of the nuclear reaction in the center of the sun?
Yeah.
It's 5.2 million horsepower.
Imagine the horse researcher who cracks that. It's like, you're right, Dr. Buttercup. That is a lot of horses. So one of the fascinating things from your video that I took away was how old this line of research actually is. And you mentioned that it was originally identified in the 1920s.
Yes.
It's really amazing to think like the theoretical physics that was taking place, and it's all on a chalkboard, as Albert Einstein and other theoretical physicists were laying out a course of what the math told them and coming up with ideas of the theory of relativity, black holes, string theory. Like all of that stuff is taking place in figures on a chalkboard. And on the other side of it, you have research that takes place in labs or with experiments around radiation and identifying what is actually happening here with this radioactive isotope. What potentially could happen if we did these other things, and what could happen, and coming up to that moment of identifying nuclear fusion. Do you know, was the identification of fusion, was that something that was because of theoretical research, or was it because of something of hard experimental research?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, of course it starts with theoretical stuff, but I think it was in the early 30s that one of the first experiments was done that was tracking, I think it was protons towards a target. And it was measuring the energy that was generated from those. It was like the first actual physical experiment that was done that kind of confirmed fusion and how it was starting to, the understanding of how it worked. Mm-hmm. So that it kind of is in the same exact time frame as the development of like the nuclear bomb. So it was like the research into fission and fusion was kind of going hand in hand, down to kind of like parallel paths.
And you can't help but think about the doctors, like, you know, I just envision a room full of middle-aged old white guys.
Yeah.
And they've all got white lab coats on, and they're wearing like dark, goggles. And, the one person who's going to throw the button, throw the lever that's going to start this thing going peep, peep, and it's probably totally anticlimactic. It's probably this thing that looks like a large box with a bunch of dials on it. And then there's a little metal platform some feet away, as opposed to looking like lasers and robots and all the cool stuff that we like to think of. It probably looked very anticlimactic. But I can't help but think there must have been a moment where somebody was going to like push the button to start this thing that would just go pop, 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 and they would measure dial readings and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But before the guy pushes that button, if some old white guy leaned over to some other old white guy and whispered, "What do you think the chances are this will vaporize Gary?"
Oh my God.
And
Yeah.
like, I'd give you even money on that. Like, how
Well,
terrifying it must have been at some moments to say, like, and now, gentlemen, we're going to press this button and see what happens to that metal. It is entirely possible that this room will combust.
What's funny is you got the nuclear fission bomb, and then you have hydrogen bombs, which are fusion bombs. So it's like the first
Right.
like major scale versions of this stuff were let's blow stuff up.
Yeah. Well,
Which is
you know,
kinda scary.
Oppenheimer lived with the guilt of having
Yeah.
been one of the key architects of the atomic bomb, and spent the rest of his life basically being a proponent of nuclear, taking apart the nuclear arsenals, because he was like, it's an unholy amount of power to use it that way.
Yeah.
And there really was theoretically, like, what is happening here? Our curiosity is driving our research. And then behind them is the group of people made up of everything from government to corporate to military, saying, like, we can use that right now.
Yeah.
And the real push-pull of moral ambiguity involved in all of that. So I think when you brought up that it was 1920s, and it's suddenly like, it was kind of a light bulb moment over my head of all those movies from the 1950s of them. And, you know, I've been watching in the social isolation period that we're currently living through. I have been watching a lot of Mystery Science Theater, and so many of their movies are from the Cold War era.
Yep.
And one of the things it's easy to say, oh, the Cold War era came out of World War II. But the seeds of what the Cold War era sci-fi was actually hearkening to was what you pointed out, which was the 1920s and 1930s research.
Mm-hmm.
Because the application of that in World War II in the form of the atomic bomb put it in front of everybody's radar. But when it came to the style of science that was depicted, they were actually showing something that existed before that bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. They are looking at those scientists in those rooms with their white lab coats and their dark goggles. And so when you said, oh, it started in the 1920s, it suddenly clarified for me all of that 1950s sci-fi pop of what science represented at that time. And the pop culture take on all of that largely was, we really don't know what the hell is happening.
Yes.
And so here you are talking about, they're still trying to piece together fusion. They're still trying to figure out. They know what is happening, but in some cases, how to harness it is the question mark. And I think it's fascinating. We're still now in the 21st century, in the 2020s. And in some ways, it feels very much like the sci-fi pop response of the 1950s is still here.
Well, it is. And that's actually the kind of the main thrust of my kind of thesis statement of the video, which was people keep going to that knee-jerk reaction of fusion energy is a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. And it's because it's been going on since the 20s and 30s, and we still don't have it. You're talking like 90 years. We're heading towards 100 years of fusion energy research, and we still don't have it. But we have the fission energy nailed. So it's like we have one half of the equation done. The other half seems like we're never going to get to it. So people just get this knee-jerk reaction. It's never going to happen. But the point that I was trying to drive home was this is a multi-generational process. Just because it didn't happen in your parents' lifetimes, and it may not happen in my lifetime, doesn't mean it won't happen. It's just our technical ability to do it has been limited. And as we have new breakthroughs in different technologies, it kind of unlocks old ideas we had to put on the shelf because we couldn't do them. But now we have these lasers now that can do petawatts of energy. It's like, that's what we needed. Now we've got those lasers. So let's go back to that old idea and try it now. So it's one of those, scientists basically all say the same thing. We will have fusion energy. There's no doubt. It's just a matter of when, because there's challenges we have to overcome. And as we unlock new technologies, it's making it more and more possible.
It's also, you mentioned the hurdles between having something that would work in a lab and something that could actually be a product, either in a home. If like some of these things really look like some of the research is being developed around local power, as opposed to like massive. Like you think of fission reactors, which are, of course, you wouldn't want a fission reactor in your basement.
So some of these new companies are basically proposing that, Sean.
Yeah, it's what I'm saying is that some of these look like they were on the scale of like you could have this in your house. Yeah, you could have this in your house.
Yeah.
And then it becomes the lab research goes into, can we do this? We finally reached the point where we can. I can't imagine how long that stuff will be debated in government around safety and security issues, because the idea of you put nuclear in front of any word and immediately it sounds like it's potentially dangerous. So it's a nuclear fusion reactor, from my understanding. Let's say that you could build something that was the size of a suitcase and you could use it to power your house and your car and all that stuff. Based on your video, it was hard for me to know, would that be potentially dangerous in a way that would be beyond, I can open up my wall and I could lick an outlet and I could kill myself.
Yes.
But I would be killing myself, or conceivably I could start an electrical fire and burn down the house. So like I'm not saying that what we currently have is absolutely foolproof or not dangerous in any way, but the word nuclear adds a level of bum, bum, bum to all of this. And my question is this technology that, if it is put out in the public in that way, is potentially dangerous as opposed to solar or wind turbine?
From everything I understand, it's no more dangerous than something like, if the reaction goes wrong, it's not going to destroy a city. Let's put it that way. The more important thing that I took away from it was the nuclear reaction is not radioactive in the same way as a fission reaction, where Chernobyl melts down and now nobody can go around Chernobyl for the next 200 years. If something like this exploded and destroyed the reactor itself, you could go in there next month. You know what I mean? It's not going to be this horrible thing that's emitting radiation for hundreds of years, where the explosion that's possible from this kind of thing, if anything can be made into a weapon. So like I said, hydrogen bombs are fusion. So it's like, it is possible to weaponize it. It's also possible to weaponize a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
The Boston Marathon was bombed with a pressure cooker. So it's like to hold that up and say, oh my God, you could weaponize fusion reactors and it could become a weapon of terrorists. It's like, there are already weapons of mass destruction that they can get their hands on. This is like no worse than the worst case scenario they already have access to.
Right.
But it's actually safer than nuclear fission using uranium and plutonium and things like that, because this is using seawater,
right?
Deuterium and tritanium to create the reaction and make helium. So it's like, it's a safer form of nuclear reaction, but people assume nuclear and think radiation.
Right. And from a safety perspective, I imagine one of the things that happens in a solar nuclear fusion is hydrogen is being converted into helium. So I imagine that on a fusion reactor level, if something goes wrong, we would know, because all of our voices would get super high and squeaky.
Yeah, we get very squeaky.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the first warning sign.
Yes.
You're like, guys, get out of here. I think something's wrong.
Oh my God. I should have put that in the video.
Yeah. I'm available for your next one.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed in the discussion after your video was that there was some back and forth in your viewers' comments around thorium. And I was wondering if you had any information around thorium, and I know it wasn't included in your video, but did you have any additions that you wanted to make?
Yeah, people have brought up, like when I talk about grid scale energy storage, people talk about, oh, we need thorium reactors. And in this video, when I talk about fusion, it came up again. There are people that are clearly huge proponents of it. One of those people is Bill Gates. I mean, he's funding companies that are doing thorium. They're putting together thorium reactors. The research behind it. It's something that we've had knowledge about for decades. It's not something new, but we've never really had working thorium reactors in the world for grid scale energy. The standard nuclear reactors we have today kind of took hold. But the thing about thorium is it's less efficient than a standard nuclear reactor, which is part of the reason they were put on the shelf, because it was, if you're trying to power a city of 1 million people, it may not be able to support the full scale, so you might have to build a couple of them. It's safer. That's part of the reason why people keep bringing it up. The reaction itself is easier to manage. Like when you shut the reactor off, the reactor actually stops. Where when you're using uranium and plutonium,
that's a nice feature.
Well, I mean, think about Chernobyl. It's like
China
a runaway. Yeah, when a runaway reactor, it literally melts through the base of the reactor and starts burning its way to the core and hits the water table. It's going to destroy an entire area.
Yeah.
So it's like thorium reactors are absolutely safer, but they don't produce as much energy, which is why they were done in the past. And people keep holding it up as the path to go because we have the knowledge and know-how how to do it today. So why are we not doing it? Why are we wasting money and time on fusion? But it comes back to the same thing I always bring up every time. We can walk and chew our gum at the same freaking time. There's nothing to say.
Yeah.
We can't build a thorium reactor over here and have some scientists over here doing research into fusion. It's like there's nothing that says that we can't do both. And the reason I didn't talk about it was because it's its own video.
Yeah.
And I thought about bringing it up, but as soon as I thought about bringing it up, it's like, this is like a hornet's nest. As soon as I talk about it, it's like going to take me down a path I don't intend to go down on this specific video. So I may do a video about it later.
Well, as a viewer, I would think that would be very interesting. I would be interested in that as a video.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that discussion keeps coming up again and again, and I think that your viewers have kind of demonstrated an interest in that would be worth paying attention to.
Yeah, there's definitely an interesting clean energy generation, and it's like thorium reactors could be that. So it's definitely something worth talking about.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's not all. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to any of this. It would be analogous to saying, well, pick one, solar power or hydroelectric. You got to pick one.
It's like people go, I'm team solar. I'm team thorium. I'm team fusion. It's like, why do you have to be on anybody's team? Why can't we be like looking into all of this stuff?
Well, what's remarkable too is if you could get all three of those people to work together, they could form Captain Planet.
Yes.
So come on, teams. Let us know what you think. You can reach out to us on Twitter at StillTBDFM. You can reach me at by Sean Farrell. You can reach Matt at Matt Farrell or at UndecidedMF. Please be sure to watch the latest videos from Undecided with Matt Farrell on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can leave comments on his videos there. You can find the podcast at stilltbd.fm. And please be sure to subscribe to the podcast as well. You can do that through iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere that podcasts are available. Please be sure to give us a rating, review, and share us with your friends, because it really does help the podcast. The podcast helps the channel helps Matthew then helps me, and I help Captain Planet. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. You can be sure to watch. That's a sentence that doesn't make any sense. Yeah.